We are on. Good morning, and thank you all so much for coming. I'm very happy to be here today at the second IDCA conference. I'd like to thank our host, Mike King, and everyone here at the St. Patrick Center for planning and organizing all the events. I'd also, in addition, like to thank all of my friends and really a family that we have here of like-minded individuals who have come together, and I've really felt welcomed, and it does really feel like a family. So thank you all very much. To clarify, today at this conference or this talk I'll be discussing key patterns, and in my workshop. Today I'm going to be talking more about the historical development of the key patterns, and I'll go into my methods on Saturday at the workshop. And key patterns really have always been the least understood of all the Celtic art forms. I struggled for years pasting bits and pieces together and trying to reproduce the historical examples, but I had no real understanding of the structural elements and no idea how to use them in a creative way. And so finally, out of frustration in 2015, I decided to take a hard look at those key patterns I'd been avoiding and do some serious research. And my investigation into their structure naturally led to a search for their historical roots and the evidence of their development, which I'd like to discuss today. I began by analyzing the basic structure of both maze and key patterns in search of their common roots, hoping to find the Holy Grail, the one true historical method. And I found the common roots, but as for the Grail, well, it seems there never really was one, or never really was just one. And looking through the historical record, it's obvious that the methods of choice depended on a number of factors, including personal preference. Some artists use grids to lay out their patterns. Others preferred to work freehand. Some very carefully planned their designs, while others like to improvise, just as artists still do today. In recent years, I've had the pleasure to correspond with our colleague, Dr. Cynthia Thickpenny, on the subject of key patterns and improvisation. Our separate lines of research began about the same time. And fortunately, since then, we've been able to compare notes, a really wonderful exchange of thoughts and ideas. And from what I've seen in the manuscripts, it confirms our observations on the variety of methods used. And I particularly like her comparison of the Insular artist to jazz artists. They constantly push the boundaries of the art form while respecting its structure. And that's a good metaphor because in jazz, the song is the structure. It's a framework for the artist to improvise on. And once you've learned the basic rules, you don't have to think about the music, you just play. And drawing key patterns is much the same. They require the ability to improvise and to think on different levels. And they come with a set of rules that must be respected. They can be done using a variety of methods and strategies, depending on the complexity and scale of the design. But because the guidelines eventually become part of the pattern, it's extremely difficult to tell how it was constructed after the fact. There's still no academic consensus on exactly which methods were used, and even the basic structure of key pattern is only now beginning to be understood. Mostly this is because historians have never agreed on a set of terms to define what they were looking at. And so I prefer to use the ones that seem the most precise. In her recent thesis, Dr. Thickpenny proposed a new set of terms to describe the structure of key pattern, expanding on those of J. Romilly Allen. No doubt her terminology will become the academic standard, and so I've adopted it and also expanded on it. Based on their structure, I would designate mazes apart from key patterns. But based on their chronology in insular art, I believe we also need to include a subcategory for the latter. J. Romilly Allen grouped mazes and key patterns together under the name KeyPattern, and most scholars still do. 100 years later, Aidan Meehan also grouped them together, but called them maze patterns. And I think we should use both terms because there is a clear structural difference. Mazes are most commonly done in square or diamond-shaped cells, as seen here in the Book of Durrow. But the host cell can be of any shape. What really matters is the course of the path within the cell. In a maze, the paths always remain parallel to each other as they approach the center. There's no negative background other than the outlines of the path. In KeyPattern, the path diverges at an angle, leaving areas of background visible, usually little black triangles or rectangles. And like mazes, key patterns are spirals and straight lines, but the course of the path is much different and much more variable. The ones we most often think of as key patterns are a special case, and as such deserve their own subcategory. I'll be referring to these as triangular key patterns or triangular keys. Though they sometimes appear in single rows, they're usually drawn in pairs by dividing the diamond-shaped cell into two triangular half cells. And the dividing bars, which you see in white here, give them the appearance of being stacked in rows, but they're actually far more easily constructed by splitting the diamond cells rather than pasting together triangular ones. And finally, mazes and keys can be combined in the same panel. Combination patterns are an advanced motif and the final stage of development. As usual, J. Romilly Allen was the first to notice this development, although from what I've seen in the manuscripts, his conclusions seem to have been a bit premature. But never underestimate J. Romilly Allen or write him off as out of date. He may not always be right, but he's never far from the truth. He and Joseph Anderson recorded an astounding number of ancient patterns, along with their locations. But unfortunately, they never organized them chronologically. And I'm sorry to report that after years of searching, I've been unable to find any study that examines maze and key patterns in the order they appear in insular art. Luckily, in the past decade, we've seen a huge increase in online facsimiles. And so in my research, I've been able to go through the original manuscripts page by page, charting the appearance of each type. In early Christian monuments, Romilly Allen suggested that key patterns were the inevitable result of turning a square grid into a diagonal one. He believed that they were developed in order to fill the empty triangles along the edges of a diagonal maze. A logical conclusion and what I expected to find in the manuscripts. But instead, it appears that the chronology of development was not so neat, and with a slight twist on Romilly Allen's theory. Now, without question, chevrons and mazes were the first on the scene. These appear already fully developed on the Maze-In bracelet, carved over 20,000 years ago. Mammoth ivory, no less. Now, Aidan Meehan claims that this carving represents the historical sequence of development from chevron to maze, which is intriguing, but of course the original artist's intention can't be proven. But it is amazing to see such advanced work being done in the Paleolithic. This artist was no novice, but a master carver with an intuitive understanding of the geometric principles. And it's a long jump from Maze in Ukraine to the British Isles, both in distance and time. We don't know exactly how or when mazes first arrived, although carvings of chevrons and diamond patterns in early insular art, such as at Newgrange, may indicate an early date. But we can't discount the influence of the Romans, and through them, the influence of Greek art. Here we see Samuel Lyson's 18th century reconstruction of the Great Orpheus mosaic at Woodchester. Greco-Roman mazes and fretwork would certainly have been familiar to artists south of Hadrian's Wall and to some extent Scotland. Notably though, classical mazes are done on the square, not on the diagonal, which is the norm in insular art. However, a diagonal 5-dot grid is used in Roman platework, the predecessor and basis for knotwork. So it is possible that the insular artists oriented their mazes diagonally in order to take advantage of the same grid. Unfortunately, this most likely will remain a theory since very little evidence survives from the time between the Roman period and the first appearance of diagonal mazes. There must have been some stages of development, but we have no idea what that might have looked like. Diagonal mazes burst onto the scene fully formed in the Book of Durrow, usually dated from the mid-7th century. And here we can see that the artists have already mastered large field designs and are experimenting with their form, including some that come remarkably close to KeyPattern. But notably, the borders remain empty, and there is not a single scrap of triangular KeyPattern to be found. The Durham Gospels also contain complex maze patterns, even adapted for circles. And all the major Celtic motifs are there, but once again, with the exception of triangular key patterns. Folio 2R does have a semicircular key pattern seen here on the right, a premonition of things to come. But the artist still had a problem. Fitting a diagonal maze into a rectangular panel leaves empty triangles along the edges, and so far they still hadn't figured out a way to fill them. At the beginning of the 8th century, we see the first triangular keys in the Lindisfarne and St. Chad Gospels, fully formed in horizontal and vertical rows. And once again, there are no precedents in insular art and no earlier stages of development. And I think the most striking thing about these early manuscripts is that the mazes and triangular keys will appear on the same page, but never in the same panel. And obviously, the artists consider them to be different motifs, not to be mixed. And this is surprising. With their common structure, you would expect, as Romilly Allen did, that the key patterns evolved directly from the maze, not separately. But Cynthia Thickpenny's research has shown that key patterns likely began with the running dog pattern in weaving, a hook shape that provides strength and cohesion and prevents the fabric from warping. Although structurally related to mazes, it seems that key patterns developed independently and that triangular keys deserve their own category. Their late appearance in the manuscripts and their deliberate separation from mazes, I believe, is strong evidence to support this. But once introduced, these new patterns seem to have made quite an impact. By mid-century, they turn up in the St. Gall Gospels, numbers 60 and 1395, as well as the Akensis and Cadmud Gospels. And here, triangular key patterns are the dominant motif, knocking mazes out of fashion. But again, wherever they do appear, mazes and key patterns are always drawn in separate panels. Until the Book of Dimma. Being a pocket gospel, Dimma is often overlooked in favor of the larger, more decorated manuscripts. But in this little book, we see that the scribes had finally solved their century-old problem: how to fill those empty triangles along the borders of the maze. It was almost inevitable, since mazes and keys share the same structure. One has to wonder what took them so long. But once the two were combined, the artist instantly recognized the possibilities. In the Book of Dimma and the later St. Gall Gospels, we see the first wave of experimentation. You really have to love the artist of St. Gall 51. Without question, it's the most creative work ever done by a bad draftsman. He's a bit sloppy, he works too fast, and he makes a few mistakes, but his ideas are absolutely brilliant. It's practically an entire library of new maze and key patterns, some reduced to near abstraction, others embellished with spirals and lozenges. And so by the end of the 8th century, the maze was back with a vengeance and fortified with triangular keys. In the Book of Kells, we find the same wonderful library of motifs as St. Gall, but done in an expert hand with sophistication, style, and subtlety. And here we see two examples designed by the artist formerly known as the portrait painter, but now identified by Duncan McGavin as the scribe artist. While not as finely executed as Kells, the Harley Golden Gospels also contain many examples of both triangular keys and combination patterns. This detail here is a good example of how mazes and keys can be mitered in borders. And over the next 2 centuries, maze and key patterns would become fine art, especially in the later Pictish stones and the Irish high crosses. Just as in Kells, we see an amazing variety of combinations along with transitions to other motifs such as knotwork, spirals, and zoomorphics. And the sculptured stones that contain key pattern are pretty much all considered to be class 2 or 3, contemporary with or later than the Book of Kells. And these represent the last stage of development. So for a quick recap, mazes arrive sometime around 600 to 650 AD in Durham and Duro, along with early key patterns. Not long after, in the Lindisfarne Gospels, we see the first triangular keys, which become wildly popular and spread very quickly. And finally, at the turn of the 9th century, artists first recognized the common structure of maze and key patterns and combined them just in time for the last and greatest blossoming of insular art. Now, the development of insular key pattern took place over a period of roughly 400 years. And archaeologically speaking, this is a very, very short span, and dating is problematic, especially given the small number of surviving artworks. But I feel the manuscripts will always be our best source, since they can be more reliably dated than metal or stonework. And the manuscript record seems to suggest that we can trace the development of maze and key patterns by correlating their structure and their chronology. It's possible that future discoveries will upset this timeline, and I'd welcome anything that gets us closer to the truth. That's the scientific method. But for now, we must work with what we have, and I think the manuscripts are still our best bet. My own research into key pattern has mainly been a structural analysis, but that analysis naturally led me to investigate its historical roots. Dr. Thickpenny's research in that area has been very enlightening, and our conversations have both widened my scope and challenged my preconceptions of key pattern itself. In my Saturday workshop, I'll be discussing the structural elements and demonstrating a new approach, which I call the diamond method. And it's not so much a new method as a new way of thinking. It's a systematic way for artists to create new key pattern, and a precise tool for scholars to analyze and reverse engineer the ancient ones. So I hope you'll join us on Saturday for a hands-on experience in drawing these endlessly fascinating patterns. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all so much for listening, and I hope to see you then. I will. In order to save time and give a few minutes to our next speakers, I'll take questions when we come back in a little while. Thank you so much.
Much